Hello, and welcome back to Tranquility du Jour, nourishing conversations about living a full and meaningful life with doses of tranquility. I'm your host, Kimberly Wilson, bringing you tranquility through this medium since 2005. Today, I am talking with a very special guest that I've actually saved for the end of the year because I felt it was just such the perfect kind of wrap up around the holidays and transitioning into a new year. So I hope you will enjoy this as much as I enjoyed interviewing. Shelly Tygielski is the author of a new book called Sit Down to Rise Up. She's also, a CNN hero, no big deal. Hear how radical self-care can change the world, the importance of showing up and taking small steps, right? We always talk about those micro movements, and how to set up your own mutual aid network. So I am fresh off the plane from Oklahoma. I was there for a few days visiting family. And, there's just something, of course, so sweet and special about this week, right? As we move into the holidays, it's like quiet in the city. There's parking available. It's, the airports were so busy. And of course, had I not booked this flight pre-Omicron, I would not have been going, but did it as safely as possible and was really a delight to be able to be with my family for a few days. Now, those of you who are traveling, I wish you smooth and safe travels. And I also hope that you will be tuning in to either the Tranquility Coterie. We have about 10 spots left, and then I am closing the doors. So if you are interested, be sure to check that out. It's a year-long immersion into the Tranquility du Jour lifestyle. And we kick off on New Year's Eve with a welcome soiree. Now, also, I'm offering the New Year's virtual retreat, which I've done for the past maybe 15, 20 years. But of course, this one is virtual, as I mentioned. They used to be in person, which was always lovely at the yoga studio. So now virtual, January 1st from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern time. You will get a replay in case you cannot join us live. And the 2 to 4 also includes a 1-hour pre-recorded yoga and meditation intention setting that I will be giving to you. So it's 3 hours really in advance of the retreat. So if you are free on New Year's Day and would like to join us, would love to have you. Also, if you are new to Tranquility du Jour, there's a link to learn more. And be sure to hit that subscribe button in your favorite podcast app so you don't miss an episode of Tranquility du Jour. So Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon, however you like to get to your podcasts. Now, without further ado, Shelly is the author of Sit Down to Rise Up and founder of the global grassroots mutual aid organization, Pandemic of Love. Her work has been featured by over 100 media outlets, including CNN Heroes, The Tamron Hall Show, The Kelly Clarkson Show, CBS This Morning, New York Times, and The Washington Post. A trauma mindfulness teacher and a Garrison Institute fellow, she has been called one of the 12 powerful women of the mindfulness movement by mindful.org and teaches self-care and resilience at organizations around the world. Visit her online at shellytygielski.com, and that's tygielski.com. Welcome, Shelly.
Thank you so much for having me.
So tell me, what inspired you to write Sit Down to Rise Up? And listeners, you can't see this, but I'm holding up the book. And the subtitle is How Radical Self-Care Can Change the World. Such a beautiful book. So give us a little insight on the inspiration behind it.
Absolutely. The book actually evolved tremendously in the last year that I had been writing it, because we were entering a pandemic, which of course nobody foresaw. And so it seemed, to take on a different life of its own. But the impetus and the sort of the inspiration initially for the book was rooted in my personal experiences around how self-care when formalized and when done in a community and really seen as communal care, can be incredibly effective, not just to survive, but to actually shift into thriving. And what I noticed was that, when we are able to work together, and this is just born out of personal experiences and struggles and strife that I had to go through, I realized that, that I could share this knowledge with other individuals and really be able to hopefully help them enact self-care and what it really means, not what the industrial wellness complex is telling us it means nowadays, but that we could enact self-care and really make sure that everybody in our community has enough. And what's interesting is that the book is written in 3 different parts. The first section is called the me, the journey of the me, which is really the inner journey, right? The work that we have to do of self-healing, of examining intergenerational trauma, doing shadow work, really taking care of ourselves spiritually, mentally, physically, etc. And it then leans into the second part of the book, which is the journey of the we, which is the communal journey. So that when we are healed, or that when we're on in a place where we can give of ourselves more, then it's our inherent responsibility to look to others, to actually tend to them and to help lift others in our circles of influence. And the third section is the one that I really didn't conceive of until after the pandemic started, which is the journey of us. And that is when many communities get together and we're all rowing in the same direction. And it's the journey of creating movements and really starting to create cultural shifts and societal shifts and structural shifts in the world around us, and really rectifying the things that we don't like, that we're seeing in our communities, in our government, and beyond.
Yeah, I love the way it's broken out. It's really helpful. And of course, it's like starting from within and then building out. And so you describe yourself as a self-care activist.
Yeah.
Which I love that idea, right? And tell us a bit more about what does that mean? Because as you said earlier, it's not so much what the wellness industry necessarily sells, right? Like baths, which I do love and support, and flowers and candles and tea, right? But it's like, what's a self-care activist?
Well, a self-care activist really is somebody who is rooted in the historic meaning of self-care. And the roots of self-care began and were born out of the feminist movement, out of the civil rights movement, and really started in communities that did not have access to basic care, and many communities today still don't have access to the care that many of us do enjoy and can afford to get. And so self-care was a radical act. In many ways it was an act of survival, and not seen like it may be today as an act of like self-indulgence or something that's selfish, but rather it was an act of self-preservation. And it was Audre Lorde actually who wrote that self-care is actually also an act of political resistance, because it was. And so it's really I think when I say I'm a self-care activist, it's somebody who's sort of taking back the definition of self-care and then teaching others how to create formalized self-care plans and formalized self-care communities that can become pillars of our society. And really, as I describe it back in the book, I call it taking us to this nostalgic time period that our grandparents told us about, called back in the day. This mystical, magical period that I'm sure everybody's heard that phrase in one language or another of like, back in the day when we were kids, people took care of each other. We knew our neighbors. We all sort of had this inherent responsibility, a moral obligation to take care of each other. And so really being a self-care activist is somebody who is on the front lines of trying to make that happen.
And how does that show up in day to day? Could you give an example of how you see it play out?
Well, sure. So if you have a formalized self-care plan, which is something that I walk people through in the book, then you're able to start to create these sort of rhythms in your life. You identify these daily rhythms, weekly rhythms, monthly rhythms, seasonal rhythms, and you're able to understand how you need to take care of yourself, right? Not just in moments where you have to sort of break glass in case of an emergency. And usually in those moments when, the fire is raging, you're making not necessarily always the best decisions, right? You're reaching for the glass of wine, you're reaching for the cheesecake or whatever, is in front of you, and all these other vices. You're not necessarily in the mood to go for a run or to exercise or to call a friend, right? And so you wallow in your own sorrow. And so having a formalized plan that we can turn to on a daily basis helps us define sort of this cadence and helps us create these rituals and again, in a very formalized way, and daily habits. These rituals ultimately become daily habits, and nothing is more important than having really important habits. So here's, a really simple thing that I, do every single day. Or actually I'll give you two. So the first thing is that when I wake up in the morning, I think about, before I reach for the phone, before I get out of bed, before anything, I sit and I think, well, what is the intention that I want to cultivate in my life today? And I let any word arise. I don't think about it. I don't harp upon it. I don't sort of filter through what's coming through. I just think, what intention do I want to cultivate more of in my life today? And then I add this key phrase, which is really like a mantra, which is if only for today. So it's just for today, right? So there's no pressure. It's not tomorrow. It's not like a resolution where we're like, oh, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. We know how those things go. Often that's not a very effective way to go about things. But if only for today I was going to be more kind, or if I was going to be more patient, or if I was going to try to be more present, what would that look like as it pertained to even the most mundane tasks that I have to do throughout the day, right? And so, that's one thing. I think about that throughout the day. I write a little note to myself so that I can remind myself throughout the day that this is the word. The other thing is that I've started to incorporate, and this was long ago, but I started to incorporate micro habits into my life. So a simple example of that is that, we're human, so we all have biological needs. And, we all go to the bathroom every day, multiple times a day. And we hopefully wash our hands. And now we know how to do it properly because the CDC told us how to do it. And so for 60 seconds while we're sitting there scrubbing, our hands, rather than being on the phone or talking to somebody, if you're in a communal bathroom, or, thinking about all the things you have to do or rushing, you can actually use those 60 seconds to do some breathing exercises, and just incorporate some really practical mini self-care tips that help you then show up to your next task more fully and show up with a different quality. So it's really about creating these sort of practical habits, these practical techniques and ways to encourage us to really also identify the obstacles that are standing in our way. Why is it that we're not able to do certain things? Like if we know that we have to be more physically active, but we're not necessarily the type of person that does that on a daily basis, right? It's hard for us to do that. I'm that type of person, by the way. Like I am not one of those kind of gym rats, so to speak. I've never been, I love physical activities and going outdoors, et cetera, but that doesn't always happen every day. And so the way that I can get motivated is by having like a self-care buddy, or, at least telling somebody what my obstacles or challenges are, and having somebody else help me remove those obstacles, is a key as well. So having things written down in a formalized way really gives us the opportunity to lean on something and to, have something to turn to, not just in moments of crisis, but I think on a daily basis to make sure that we have this sort of credo, a manifesto of self-care for ourselves, because we deserve it.
Mm-hmm. I love the idea too. I mean, the importance of writing it down, it just kind of like solidifies it somehow, right? Versus,
Yeah.
just thinking about it, even though thinking's great, and making a plan and a micro habit, but
Yeah.
it's nice to write them down. So how do we find simple, unconditional happiness?
Ooh, simple, unconditional happiness. Well, I mean, there are two kinds of happiness, right? Conditional, which is really based on sort of exterior things like material things. And, if I achieve this and if I buy this house and if I get this title and if I get married and if I have, so it's really tied to sort of goals, if you will, that we set for ourselves, that, or maybe that society sets for us, in some way as well. Um, Unconditional happiness really has nothing to do with that. It really has to do with sort of bringing back, gratitude and sort of these simple understanding that the things that matter are actually not things at all. And, I know that sounds really cliche and it sounds, oh, like, okay, that sounds too oversimplified. But, there are many, amazing books other than my own that actually talk about the achievement of unconditional happiness that is not necessarily rooted or tied in anything more than just I'm alive today, and I'm breathing and I'm here for one more day, and I've been sort of gifted with this opportunity to show up, to show up in my life, to show up and be present in other people's lives, and uh, to really understand that I have the agency to make changes and to inspire others, and that my decisions and my words and my actions will affect others. And at the end of the day, that's really all that matters.
Thank you. Yeah, I love that, because you had also mentioned, you can't have a positive mindset all the time, right? So how do we have this sort of like underlying unconditional happiness so that we're not swayed by, it's like that Pema Chodron quote, right? Like,
Yeah.
you're the sky, everything else is the weather.
Yeah.
So talk about
Beautiful.
isn't that beautiful? It always is just like, it just is like, oh, it's a big aha when I read that. So talk to us about the importance of showing up, taking those small
Mm-hmm.
steps, right? Like the micro habits you mentioned, and then making incremental change. Because, all right, let's be honest, New Year's resolutions are around the corner, right? For many
Yeah.
people. And so how do we actually make these happen? Bring these to
Yeah.
fruition?
Yeah. So, I think a lot of us think about change in a really lofty way. We think too big, where we have this mentality, and certainly again, it's perpetuated by the culture that we're living in, where it's like go big or go home. And, I think in my mindset, I'm like, well, I like going home. Like, what's wrong with going home? Why do I have to go big all the time? But, I think we need to start to water things down a bit for ourselves. We need to look at things, like you said, in an incremental way. The best way I've ever known how to create a big impact is incrementally, is being able to take the aggregate of showing up every single day in some way, whether it's for ourselves or for others or at work or what have you, and then actually, but doing it consistently, right? Every single day. And the aggregate of that, when you kind of look back in reflection, you're like, wow, I just did this for, 6 months and look where it got me, right? But when we think about it, like if you're a mountain climber, for example, and you're somebody who, is setting out to climb this like really high mountain and you try to peak, you're not thinking of the peak when you're at the base. You're thinking of the day's climb. I need to summit, I need to get to this, place by nightfall, right? And so it's just step one. You're not thinking of, oh, how am I going to climb this mountain that's 20,000 feet high, but rather you're thinking incrementally, step by step by step. And so I think that watering things down makes things a lot easier for us. There's a beautiful Buddhist proverb that says that we should tend to the area of the garden that we could reach. And I think that if we sort of lean in on that in every area of our life, right? And we stop looking at other people's gardens, first of all. Stop, looking at your neighbor's garden and saying, well, look at his wilted flowers. Why isn't he taking care of his flowers? But rather look at your own garden and think, how can I just take care of this patch, my own circle of influence, the people that I can affect change with on a daily basis, whether they're, really close, family members, or they're just acquaintances, right? We have the opportunity to tend to that on a daily basis. And if we do that on a daily basis, then the quality of that circle of influence and the, just there's shifts that occur within that circle. And then there's ripple effects that take place from that. And we can apply that same kind of premise to ourselves. If we can just stop looking around and comparing and, and looking at things in such a way where we're like thinking about the forest, then it becomes so much more attainable and achievable. And I think for myself, I'm more easily motivated to do it because I'm like, oh, it's something that I can do. It is realistic. It's not like I'm setting out to say, I'm going to lose 50 pounds in 3 months or, but rather I'm going to move my body and I'm going to, be healthier. And here's how I'm going to do it, again, in a formalized way.
And we want to write it down, right? The importance again of writing it down.
Right. Exactly.
Now, how do you encourage listeners to connect their inner world to their outer world? I feel like that's something that you really kind of focus on in the book.
Well, it starts with the notion that the best version of the world starts with the best version of us. That's first and foremost. And that works, in the inverse too, because when the world is better, we have more opportunities to be better as well. So I think that, again, it has a lot to do with showing up and sort of that linear journey that I explained earlier, which is really, tending to ourselves, getting ourselves to the place where our basic needs are met. And recognizing that even if you're not, fully healed or, you still have issues or what have you, but if you're at a place where you have enough or anything in excess of enough, and you're able to then give your time or your energy or, if it's your finances, whatever it is, then do that, and then it moves from that inner journey to the communal journey. You start to think about the people in your inner circle and think, well, does everybody in my inner circle, in my circle of influence, have enough? Is everybody okay? And if you make it your responsibility, your inherent responsibility, your moral obligation to actually make sure that everybody has enough in that circle, then it just kind of continues to grow from there. Again, that's the same principle of tending to the garden, the area of the garden that you could reach. If everybody tended to the area of the garden that they could reach, the world will look very different. But, that's just not what is actually happening on a daily basis. And so I think, again, we tend to think about the problems of the world, like, climate change or, gun violence or all these huge lofty problems that we're like, well, I'm one person. What can I possibly do? Because we're thinking about it really on a macro level, when rather we could think about it really on a micro level and say, wow, I'm really outraged by racism, for example. What can I do to change something in my, child's school or at work or in my home? What can I do about that? And if you start to think in those ways, you'll be really just amazed how there's a ripple effect that comes from those things.
Such a great reminder because, yeah, it can feel so overwhelming, especially now, right? We've got Omicron and you're just like, oh my gosh, will this ever end? And so it's like, okay, well, what can you do individually, right? Such a good reminder.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, people really, a lot of people during the onset of the pandemic really started to get sort of the importance of the simple things, right? Simpler things. When we were kind of stripped from everything, from trips and from, travels and, parties and an Instagrammable life, right? The highlight reels. We really, I think, started to, for many of us, have to have a reckoning and to look within and to say, wow, my life is really still very full, or, hey, my life is pretty empty and I need to start, thinking about and really focusing on the things that matter.
Totally. It definitely put things in perspective and continues to, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Now, you talk about also in the book, how can we set up our own mutual aid network, right? As we think about what you're just saying, how do we take the
Yeah.
micro to help affect, right, the macro or the mezzo, right? So it's like, how
Yeah.
do you recommend this?
Yeah. So, well, a mutual aid community really is a natural extension of creating a formalized community of care. So, after you've gone through the process of creating your own self care plan and sharing it with others and identifying each of you your obstacles, right? Sharing your obstacles with each other. Well, one person might say, I'm a single mom, I have time poverty, right? I work full time. I have two kids. I cannot enact these things on my self-care list because I just don't have time. There's just not enough time in the day. And so others in the community could basically say, well, I'm an empty nester and I have time, or I can, I drop your kids off at school twice a week because it's on my way to work, or I can, bring over a lasagna once a week for you because then you don't have to cook dinner and you'll have more time. And so the idea is that, we create this beautiful sort of this beautiful circumstance where people are able to ask for help, but have it not be stigmatized, right? Because I think oftentimes when we need help, it's very hard to just pick up the phone and say, I'm really struggling with this. I need help, whatever the type of help is, right? Whether it's something like extremely tangible or whether it's something that's ambiguous and like you don't even know at that point because you're so overwhelmed how you can be helped, right? We tend to have these feelings that are associated when we ask for help, with things like, we're not worthy or we're not enough or good enough or or we're a burden. We don't want to be a burden on people. And so we tend to just avoid doing that. And it just actually exacerbates the issue over time, right? It really starts to exacerbate the issue. And so when we create formalized communities of care, inherent in that structure is mutual aid, which basically is just everybody in the community has something to give and to offer, regardless of their socioeconomic status. And every single person in the community has something that they need. And so if we can just identify that and sort of lift that veil and say like, hey, here's what I'm good at. I'm a really great cook, or I have a lawnmower and I can mow people's lawns, or I can, I have extra time during the week and I can sit with an elderly person who may be feeling very isolated or lonely. And so if we can identify the things that we can give in a tangible way within that community, and then also identify the needs, then it's just so easy because we all have the pieces of the puzzle that somebody else needs. And so we're just really creating this beautiful sort of exchange that doesn't cost anything.
Yeah, I like your examples because it makes it super duper tangible. And I know there's actually, and you may be aware of this since you said it, but taking lasagna to play, there's like some organization where you sign up to do. Okay, you knew that. Yeah.
Yeah. The woman, actually, it's so funny because that woman was in the same segment. So my organization, Pandemic of Love, was featured on CNN Heroes in 2020. And the woman who creates trays of loves, it's like a lasagna, this movement of lasagna that she was started to deliver during the pandemic. She was in the same segment that I was in. So that's how I found out about her organization. So it's so funny that you mentioned that.
Yeah, very cool. I had just recently heard of it. And congratulations, by the way, on CNN Hero.
Thank
Do
you.
you want to share anything about Pandemic of Love before I ask you my last question?
Sure. I mean, I could say that Pandemic of Love is actually a scaled up version of mutual aid. So we're basically an organization that can assist your community in creating a formalized mutual aid community and give you the tools and the support, and then also a lot of best practices, and plug you into a network of other Pandemic of Love mutual aid communities. We have over 280 communities across 16 countries now. And it's a beautiful thing because we connect people directly. So we're not like a nonprofit organization. We're actually a nonprofit disruptor is how we describe ourselves. And so when person A is able to give something, we connect them with person B who needs that thing. And we step out of the way. The transaction happens directly. So for example, if you can pay somebody's utility bill, we connect you with the person who needs their utility bill paid. And in order for that transaction to happen, a human connection has to be made, a conversation has to be had. And it's beautiful because a lot of friendships have formed out of those connections. And a lot of people, took it beyond just a one-time transaction and really created these intense and really meaningful connections that I love sharing, oftentimes the stories of how those connections continue to proliferate. And those transactions, I will say, have at this point, since we started Pandemic at Love in March of 2020, have accounted for over $60 million of exchanged funds, which is phenomenal, but a testament to what I'm trying to say, because people think, wow, $60 million, that's a crazy amount of money. And I'm like, well, it is, but if you extrapolate it out mathematically and you, take into account the number of millions of people that we've connected, the average transaction is $135, which is still a significant amount of money, but it's something that I think we can all wrap our heads around, right? So when a lot of people do a little bit, it actually creates huge impact.
Beautiful. That's very impressive. Congratulations. That's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, it is incredible.
So my last question for you is the name of the podcast, right, is Tranquility du Jour. And so I always like to ask my guests, how do you find tranquility in your everyday, especially right now? Things are a bit hectic.
Yeah.
I think we've been saying that since March 2020. But how are you finding it?
I find tranquility multiple times a day. I tend to be the early riser in the house. And I wasn't always a morning person, but what I found was that when I wake up before everybody else wakes up, I actually have quiet time. There's no chaos, I don't have to make anybody breakfast or have a conversation or anything. I could actually meditate, I could journal, I could just sit and think, I could actually enjoy my coffee and, look out the window if it's snowing and just kind of be very present in that moment. The other thing is I get outdoors as often as possible, multiple times a day. I just find that, being in nature, being surrounded, if I'm in a beach town, then I, head to the beach. Right now I'm in Lake Tahoe, which is a gorgeous, beautiful place. And, it's a winter wonderland right now. It's gorgeous. And so to be able to go out and just take a walk in the snow and listen to the snow crunching beneath your feet and, just take in the natural beauty of this world, I think helps to really just recalibrate and reset your mindset so that you can, again, show up with a different quality of presence into the next activity or busyness, whatever is happening in your life in that moment.
Beautiful. It's such great reminders, right? And it really is, it circles back to what you said earlier of starting your day with a sense of intention. It's so
Yes.
important and really noticing, paying attention. So
yeah.
Thank you so much, Shelly. And congratulations. This book is beautiful. It's really, really
Thank
well
you.
done. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for your platform and for your time today.
Thank you. So in the show notes, which can be found at kimberlywilson.com/572, you will find many links to connect with Shelly: Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, and a link to her book, Sit Down to Rise Up. And then finally, be sure to sign up to receive love notes, which are invites, inspiration, and more. I'll probably send 1 or 2 before the end of the year and would love to include you in that list. Also, there's a link to my 6 books and planner, 2 that are really helpful as we think about carving out tranquility in this new year. Your year of tranquility, actually 52 weeks of tranquility also is a good one. It's more like a little journal. And then the day book, which is a planner. Then there's also links to follow along on Instagram and YouTube, and a link to shop seasonless vegan, locally made, eco-friendly fashion TDJ by Kimberly. So finally, if you have a moment to share a review of this podcast on Apple Podcast or any of my books on Amazon or Goodreads, would be so grateful. And if you take a screenshot of it and send it to me, tag me, I will be sure to send you a little treat. All right, thank you so much for tuning in. I wish you a beautiful, beautiful holiday. And I encourage you to sit down to rise up.